The needle was a sewing pin stolen from the mending basket 3 weeks ago, and Syrah had sharpened it against the foundation stones of the pack house until its tip could split a hair. She sat in the crawl space beneath the kitchen, where the pipes leaked warm water that smelled of rust and old grease, and she pressed the pin into the skin just below her left collarbone. The letters came slow. O-M-E-G-A, each one a thin red line, beading with blood that ran down her sternum and soaked into the already stained fabric of her shift. They had burned the rank mark off her shoulder that morning. 3 betas holding her down on the wooden table in the pack hall, while the brand master pressed a heated iron stamp to the place where her designation had been inked at her first shift. The smell of her own skin cooking had made 2 of the younger wolves in the doorway vomit into the bushes outside. But the brand master had not flinched, and neither had she. "You are nothing now," the Beta Prime had said, wiping his hands on a cloth as if he had touched something rotten. "Not even Omega. You are unranked. Invisible." Sarah had looked at him with steady eyes and said nothing. She had learned years ago that her silence cost them more than any words she could offer. It made them wonder what she was thinking. It made them afraid, though they would never admit, that an unranked girl with no wolf could make a beta afraid of anything. So she carved it back. Not because she was proud of being Omega, not because the rank meant anything to her anymore, but because they had taken it, and she wanted them to know that nothing they stripped from her body would stay gone. She owned her skin. She owned every ugly letter and every scar that mapped its surface. The crawl space smelled of damp concrete and the chemical sweetness of the antifreeze that dripped from the old heating system. She could hear the kitchen staff above her, the crash of pots, the barking voice of the head cook calling for more firewood. The pack house of the Silver Ridge was preparing for something. She had heard fragments over the past week, whispered between the servants, who still bothered to acknowledge her existence. The Alpha King of the Blackmoor territory was arriving tonight. Some kind of diplomatic envoy, a treaty negotiation about the disputed hunting grounds along the Eastern River. Sarah did not care. Alpha Kings came and went. They were all the same. Tall men with loud voices and wolves that pressed against everyone in the room like a hand around the throat. She finished the last letter. The A bled more than the others, which annoyed her because she had been so careful with the pin angle. She tore a strip from the hem of her shift and pressed it against the wound, holding it there with one hand while she used the other to crawl toward the gap in the foundation where she could slip outside. The autumn air hit her wet skin, and she sucked in a breath through her teeth. The Silver Ridge pack house sat on a hill above the town, and from the crawl space exit she could see the convoy of black vehicles already winding up the mountain road, their headlights cutting through the blue dusk like the eyes of enormous animals. She should not have been outside. The unranked were confined to the lower levels during diplomatic events. They were not to be seen, not to be heard, not to be smelled. Especially not to be smelled. The scent of an Omega, even an unranked one, was considered an embarrassment to the pack, as if her very biology was a stain on their reputation. But Syrah needed to get to the herb garden behind the east wing, because the wound on her collarbone needed calendula paste before it got infected, and the only person in this pack who would give her any, without questions, was old Maren, the half-blind healer, who lived in the stone cottage at the garden's edge. She moved along the shadow of the foundation wall, keeping low. The evening was cold enough that her breath came in small white clouds, and the ground under her bare feet was sharp with frost crystals that bit into her soles like tiny teeth. She had not been given shoes since September. The pack's supply officer had looked at her request form, looked at her unranked brand scar, and slid the paper into the trash without a word. She was halfway across the open ground between the pack house and the garden wall when the convoy crested the hill. The first vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows, swung wide on the gravel drive, and its headlights swept across the yard like a searchlight. Sarah dropped flat against the frozen grass. The cold bit through her thin shift and into her ribs, and the fresh wound on her collarbone pressed against the ground and screamed. She bit the inside of her cheek and tasted copper. The vehicle stopped. Doors opened. She heard boots on gravel, the low murmur of male voices, and then a sound that made every hair on her body stand straight up. A growl, not from a throat, from a chest, the kind of sound that traveled through the ground itself, vibrating up through the frozen earth and into her bones where she lay pressed against it. It was subsonic, almost below hearing, and it carried something in it that her body recognized before her mind could name it. Her wolf stirred. This was impossible. Sarah's wolf had been dormant since she was 14. 7 years of silence. The healers had declared it dead, a genetic failure, proof that she was the weakest link in a pack that prized strength above all things. She had mourned it like a death, and then built a life around the absence the way you learn to eat with your left hand after losing your right. But something in that growl reached down into the place where her wolf had been sleeping and pulled. Sarah pressed her forehead against the frozen ground and squeezed her eyes shut. Not now. Not here. She could not afford to feel this. Whatever this was. The gravel crunched closer. She could hear the delegation being greeted by Alpha Hendricks of Silver Ridge, his booming voice full of false warmth and political calculation. She heard the names: Commander Thorne, Advisor Cale, and then a pause, a gap in the introductions, where the air itself seemed to thicken and the temperature dropped by 2 degrees. Alpha King Cale Blackmore, someone announced, and the way they said it told Sarah everything she needed to know. The voice trembled, not with excitement, with fear. She needed to move. She needed to crawl the last 30 feet to the garden wall and disappear behind it before anyone spotted a girl lying face down in the yard like a piece of discarded laundry. She lifted her head just enough to gauge the distance, and she saw him. He was stepping out of the second vehicle, and the first thing she registered was not his height, though he was tall enough that the door frame of the SUV seemed built for a smaller species. It was not his shoulders, though. They were the kind of shoulders that made doorways a negotiation. It was his stillness. Everyone around him was moving, adjusting coats, checking phones, straightening postures. He simply stood, the way a mountain stands, as if the world arranged itself around him and not the other way around. His hair was black and cut close to his skull, and there was a scar that ran from his left temple down past his ear, disappearing into the collar of his dark coat. His jaw was the kind of jaw that looked like it had been designed to take a punch and deliver one. But his eyes, even from 30 feet away, in the blue light of dusk, she could see that his eyes were the amber gold of late autumn honey, and they were scanning the yard with the patient, methodical attention of a predator who had learned long ago that threats came from unexpected directions. His gaze swept across the frozen grass. It found her. Sarah stopped breathing. She was lying flat. Her shift was the color of dirty snow. She was small and thin, and should have been invisible against the frost-covered ground. But his eyes locked onto her the way a hawk locks onto a field mouse, and she felt the impact of his attention like a physical blow to the center of her chest. The growl came again, louder this time, and this time it was definitely from his throat. Every wolf in the convoy froze. Alpha Hendricks stopped mid-sentence. The gravel stopped crunching. The wind itself seemed to hold its breath. Alpha King Kyle Blackmore crossed the 30 feet of frozen ground in strides that ate the distance like it was nothing. His boots left deep prints in the frost. His coat flared behind him. The wolves in his delegation fanned out in a protective formation that was clearly instinctive, trained into their muscles by years of guarding a king who moved fast and without warning. Sarah tried to push herself up. Her arms shook. The wound on her collarbone opened again, and she felt fresh blood slide down her chest, warm against the cold of her skin. She got to her knees just as his shadow fell over her. He was close enough now that she could smell him. Pine resin, wood smoke, and something underneath both of those, something dark and warm, that reminded her of the leather binding on old books, the kind that had been handled so many times. The cover was soft as skin. Her wolf surged up inside her like a creature breaking through ice, and Sarah gasped audibly, her hand flying to her chest as if she could push the sensation back down. "Mate," her wolf said. The word arrived, fully formed, certain, absolute. A word her wolf had never spoken, because her wolf had never spoken at all. His eyes narrowed. He was looking at her face, and then his gaze dropped to her collarbone, where the blood had soaked through her shift in a pattern that clearly showed the shape of letters. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted like tectonic plates moving deep below a calm surface. "Who did this to you?" he said. Not a question, a demand. His voice was lower than she expected, rough at the edges, as if he did not use it often and preferred the growl. "I did it to myself," Sarah said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was a small miracle given that her entire body was vibrating like a struck bell. "I carved it. They burned off my rank this morning. So I carved it back." He stared at her. The amber eyes didn't blink. Behind him, Alpha Hendricks was approaching at a careful pace, the way you approach a situation you do not understand, but suspect might explode. "Alpha Blackmore," he said, his voice pitched to be soothing and failing spectacularly. "I see you have found one of our—" She is unranked. "A defective wolf. I apologize for the disturbance. She was supposed to be confined to the lower levels during your visit. I will have her removed immediately." The growl that came from Kyle Blackmore's chest made the windows of the nearest vehicle rattle in their frames. Two of the Silver Ridge wolves closest to Hendricks involuntarily dropped to their knees, and even Hendricks himself took a step backward, his face draining of color so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. "Say that again," Kyle said, still looking at Sarah. "Say defective again. I want to make sure I heard you correctly before I decide how many of your bones to break." Silence. The kind of silence that has weight to it. "Alpha Blackmore," Hendricks tried again, his voice now considerably less soothing and considerably more terrified. "I do not understand. She's nobody. She has no wolf." Sarah flinched at that. Not because it hurt any more, she had heard it 1,000 times, but because her wolf was currently clawing at the inside of her ribs like a caged animal, and the word "no wolf" was so absurdly wrong that it almost made her laugh. Kyle crouched down in front of her. The movement was slow, controlled the way you might crouch in front of a wounded animal to show you mean no harm. This close, she could see that his eyes had gold flecks in them that caught the last of the daylight like sparks in amber. She could see the texture of the scar on his temple raised, and silver old enough to be from his youth. She could see that his hands resting on his knees were large and scarred across the knuckles and trembling very slightly. The Alpha King's hands were shaking. He reached out. His fingers stopped an inch from her collarbone, hovering over the bloodied letters visible through her soaked shift. She felt the heat radiating from his skin, and it was extraordinary, like holding your hand near a furnace, and her body leaned toward it without her permission. "You carved your own rank back," he said, and his voice had changed. The roughness was still there, but underneath it was something almost like reverence after they tried to erase it. "Yes," Sarah said. "Why?" "Because it is mine. They can take everything else. They cannot take what I choose to put on my own skin." Something moved across his face. It was not a smile. It was not pity. It was recognition. The look of someone who understands damage because they have lived inside it. He stood. He turned to Hendricks, and the transformation was instantaneous. The softness vanished. What remained was a king, and an angry one. "This woman is my mate," he said. The words landed on the assembled wolves like stones dropped into still water, and the ripples spread outward in visible waves of shock. Sarah saw mouths fall open. She saw the Beta Prime, the one who had held her down, that morning turn a shade of green she hadn't previously believed possible in human skin. "That is impossible," Hendricks said, and it was the worst thing he could have said, because Cale Blackmore took one step toward him, and the Alpha of Silver Ridge crumpled to his knees like a man whose strings had been cut. The dominance aura rolling off Kyle was a tangible thing pressing down on every wolf in the yard, like gravity had doubled. "Tell me," Kyle said, standing over Hendricks with a calm that was more terrifying than rage. "Tell me about the burning. Tell me about the brand you put on my mate this morning. Tell me everything, and tell me now. And perhaps I will leave this pack house standing when I am finished." Sarah watched from her knees on the frozen ground, her blood soaking into the frost beneath her, her wolf howling inside her chest. And she thought, this is either a rescue or a different kind of cage. She was not sure yet which one she preferred. Kyle turned back to her. He shrugged off his coat, an enormous thing that smelled of him, pine and smoke and old leather, and he draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it was shocking. The warmth was more shocking still. She had not been warm, truly warm, in so long that the sensation brought tears to her eyes before she could stop them. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I have been walking on bare feet across frozen ground for 2 months," she said. "I can walk." Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, respect maybe, or fury banked so deep it looked like calm. "You will not walk on bare feet again," he said. And then to his commander Thorne, "Cancel the treaty negotiations." My Lord Thorne was a compact, silver-haired wolf with the wary eyes of someone who had seen his king do unexpected things before and had learned to keep his reactions small. I said, "Cancel them. We are leaving tonight, and we are taking her with us." Sarah opened her mouth to say she had not agreed to go anywhere with anyone, but Kyle was already turning back to Hendricks, who was still on his knees in the gravel, and what happened next required her attention. The Alpha King grabbed Hendricks by the front of his shirt and lifted him. Not dramatically, not like a movie, efficiently the way you pick up a piece of equipment you intend to inspect and then discard. He held Hendricks at eye level, which meant the Alpha of Silver Ridge was dangling with his boots 6 inches off the ground, and he said, "I am going to send an investigation team. Every wolf who touched her, every wolf who denied her food, every wolf who burned her rank, they will be named. They will be judged. And you, Hendricks, you will pray that my mate asks me for mercy on your behalf, because I have none of my own to offer." He dropped Hendricks. The Alpha landed badly, his ankle twisting on the gravel, and Sarah saw him wince and grab at it. And for one strange moment, she felt something she did not expect. She felt sorry for him, not because he deserved it, but because she had watched Hendricks sit in his office last winter with a bottle of whiskey and a photograph of his dead daughter, the one who had died in the border wars 3 years ago. And she had heard him crying in the dark when he thought no one was near. The man who had ordered her brand burned was also a man who had lost a child and had not recovered. Both things were true. Neither cancelled the other. She pushed herself to her feet. The coat hung past her knees and the sleeves past her fingertips. She must have looked ridiculous. She did not care. "I will go with you," she said to Cale, and the words surprised her, even as they left her mouth. "Not because you are my mate. I do not know you. I do not trust you, but because there is nothing left for me here, and whatever you are offering is at least a different kind of nothing." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he nodded once. "Fair," he said. And that was the last word spoken in the yard of the Silver Ridge pack house before the Blackmore convoy reversed direction and disappeared down the mountain road, carrying Sarah with it into a future she could not begin to imagine. The drive to Blackmore territory took 9 hours. Sarah spent the first 3 in the back seat of the SUV that smelled of leather and gun oil, wrapped in Cale's coat, watching the dark landscape slide past the windows, while her wolf paced inside her like a creature that had been locked in a room for 7 years, and was now discovering the room had a door. Kyle sat in the front passenger seat. He did not turn around. He did not speak to her. He made 2 phone calls in a low voice, both of them terse and logistical, arranging rooms and medical attention, and something about a council meeting being rescheduled. Thorne drove and said nothing. The silence in the vehicle was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who did not yet have a language for what was happening between them. At the 4th hour they stopped at a gas station on a 2-lane highway in the middle of nowhere. It was the kind of gas station that sold beef jerky and fishing lures and had a bathroom key attached to a block of wood. Sarah went to the bathroom and locked the door and looked at herself in the mirror under the fluorescent light. She looked terrible. Her hair was matted, her face was thin, the cheekbones too sharp, the skin under her eyes bruised with exhaustion. The collar of the coat had fallen open, and she could see the fresh carving on her collarbone, the letters crusted with dried blood, the skin around them angry and swollen. Omega, crooked, defiant, ugly in the way that only self-inflicted things can be ugly, because they carry intention. Her wolf pressed against the inside of her skin, and Sarah pressed her hand flat against the mirror and whispered, "Are you really there?" The wolf did not answer in words. It answered in sensation, a pulse of warmth that spread from her palm through her chest and down into her stomach, where it settled like a coal in a banked fire. "Yes, I am here. I have always been here." Sarah washed her face with the cold water from the gas station sink, used a paper towel to clean the wound on her collarbone as best she could, and went back to the car. Kyle was leaning against the vehicle, arms crossed, looking up at the stars. When she approached, he turned his head and studied her with that same patient, predatory attention. "You are not eating," he said. It was not a question. "The unranked receive meals once a day," Sarah said. "Sometimes the kitchen staff forget." His jaw worked. She could see the muscles moving under the skin, the effort it cost him to keep his voice level. "Thorne," he said, "find food." Thorne disappeared into the gas station and came back 4 minutes later with a bag containing a turkey sandwich on wheat bread, a container of chicken soup that had been heated in the microwave, a banana, a bottle of water, and a chocolate bar. Sarah ate all of it in the back seat while the convoy continued down the highway, and she ate it slowly. Not because she was being delicate, but because her stomach had shrunk to the size of a fist, and she knew from experience that eating too fast after prolonged hunger would make her sick. The soup was salty, and the chicken was rubbery, and the banana was slightly overripe, and it was the best meal she had eaten in 7 months. When she finished, she folded the empty wrappers neatly into the bag and set it on the floor. And she's noticed that Kyle was watching her in the rearview mirror. Their eyes met in the reflection. His were gold in the darkness, catching the dashboard light like a cat's. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once and looked away, and the convoy drove on through the night. Blackmore territory announced itself at dawn. The landscape shifted from flat agricultural plains to dense pine forest, the trees so tall and old that their canopy blocked the emerging light, and the road tunneled through a green darkness that smelled of resin and wet earth. Sarah pressed her face against the window and breathed it in, and her wolf surged with recognition, though she had never been here before. The pack house was not what she expected. Silver Ridge had been a converted mansion, all white columns, and pretension, the kind of architecture designed to impress humans and intimidate wolves. Blackmore was built from stone and timber, set into the side of a mountain, like it had grown there, with smoke rising from 4 separate chimneys, and windows glowing warm amber in the early morning light. It looked like a fortress that someone had accidentally made into a home, or perhaps a home that someone had deliberately made into a fortress. They pulled into a circular drive paved with flat river stones. Sarah stepped out of the vehicle, and the cold mountain air filled her lungs, and her wolf howled a soundless howl that vibrated through every cell of her body. Kyle was beside her, not touching her, close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "This is Blackmore," he said. "This is my home. And if you choose to stay, it is yours." She looked up at him. He was watching her with an intensity that should have been frightening, but somehow was not. It was the intensity of someone who had been waiting for something for a very long time and could not quite believe it had arrived. "I need a healer," she said, "for my collarbone and shoes." The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, the ghost of one. "Both," he said. "Now." The healer was a small, fierce woman named Dr. Astrid, who had steel-grey hair and steady hands, and who took one look at Sarah's collarbone and said, "You did this yourself?" "Yes." Astrid's eyes flicked to Kyle, who was standing in the doorway of the medical wing with his arms crossed, and his expression suggesting that the walls of the room were the only things preventing him from going back to Silver Ridge and dismantling it brick by brick. "Good line work for a sewing pin," Astrid said, turning back to Sarah. "You have steady hands." "I was a mender," Sarah said, "before they stripped my duties. I repaired the pack's clothing. Before that, I assisted the pack healer with wound dressing and herb preparation." Astrid cleaned the wound with antiseptic that burned cold and applied a salve that smelled of calendula and tea tree oil. Sarah nearly laughed. She had been crawling toward old Maren's garden for this exact thing 12 hours ago. "The scarring will be permanent," Astrid said. "The letters will be legible. You understand that?" "I understand that," Sarah said. "I intended it." Astrid looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah saw something in the healer's eyes that she had not seen directed at her in a long time. Professional regard. The look one competent person gives another. "You should eat more," Astrid said. "You are 15 pounds underweight, and your iron is low. I will send a meal plan to the kitchen." After the healer left, Kyle moved into the room. The space was not small. It was a proper medical examination room with steel counters and an adjustable bed. But his presence made it feel like a closet. "There are rooms prepared for you in the East Wing," he said. "Private, locked from the inside. No one enters without your permission." Sarah looked at him. She was sitting on the examination table in his coat and a pair of borrowed wool socks that one of his guards had silently produced, and she felt like a creature pulled from a river, dripping and disoriented, and not yet sure if the hand that pulled her out was attached to a rescuer or a fisherman. "What do you expect from me?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "You are my mate. That is a fact. What we do with that fact is a conversation, not a command." She searched his face for the lie. She had become very good at finding lies over the past 7 years, living at the bottom of a pack that ran on deception and hierarchy. But his face was an open door, which paradoxically made her more suspicious. "Every alpha I have ever known," she said slowly, "has used the word mate as a leash." "Then every alpha you have known has been unworthy of the word," he said. She did not answer. She slid off the examination table and let him lead her to the east wing, where a room was waiting that had a bed with actual sheets and a window that looked out over the pine forest, and a bathroom with hot water and a closet with clothing in her approximate size. She took a shower that lasted 40 minutes. The hot water turned brown and then clear as it washed away weeks of grime and cold and the particular kind of dirt that accumulates on a person who has not been allowed to use the good bathrooms. She scrubbed until her skin was pink and raw everywhere except the collarbone, which she touched, gently tracing the raised letters with her fingertip. When she came out wrapped in a towel, there were boots by the door. Real boots. Insulated, waterproof, her size. No note. No explanation. Just boots. She put them on over bare feet and stood in them and felt something crack open in her chest that she had been keeping sealed for years. The first week at Blackmoor was a study in disorientation. Sarah moved through the pack house like a ghost, eating the meals that appeared 3 times a day outside her door, sleeping in a real bed with sheets that smelled of lavender, waking at odd hours to the sound of wolves howling in the forest below. Her wolf grew stronger daily. It was like watching a plant emerge from drought, unfurling one leaf at a time, tentative and then bold. Kyle gave her space. This was perhaps the most surprising thing about him. She had expected pursuit. She had expected the suffocating closeness that came with possessive alphas, the constant touching and scent marking, and territorial hovering. Instead, he appeared at predictable intervals, always announced by a knock, always waiting for permission to enter. He brought her books. Not romance novels, though she would have read those too. Strategy texts, histories of the old packs, a battered copy of a herbal medicine compendium with handwritten notes in the margins that she later learned were his mother's. His mother had been a healer. She learned this on the 4th day, when Astrid mentioned it off-handedly during a follow-up examination. The late Queen was the one who built this medical wing, Astrid said. She believed every wolf in the pack deserved care, regardless of rank. She would have liked you. Sarah filed this information away and did not ask Kyle about it directly. She was building a picture of him, from fragments the way you assemble a mosaic from broken tiles, and the picture that was forming was more complicated than the archetype she had expected. He was feared. This was obvious. Every wolf in Blackmoor deferred to him with a respect that bordered on reverence, and not the performative respect of Silver Ridge, where wolves bowed to Hendrix because they feared punishment. These wolves respected Cale because they had chosen to. The difference was visible in the way they moved around him, confident rather than cowering, meeting his eyes rather than averting their gaze. He was also, she realized gradually, lonely. The alpha king of the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories ate dinner alone in his study most nights. His conversations with his advisors were efficient and impersonal. He had no friends that she could identify, only subordinates and allies, and the distinction was vast. On the 7th night, she knocked on his study door at 10 in the evening. "Come in," he said, and she heard surprise in his voice the first uncontrolled emotion she had detected from him. The study was warm. A fire burned in a stone hearth. The desk was covered in papers and maps. The air smelled of coffee and pine, and the old leather scent she now associated with him specifically. He was standing behind his desk, one hand on a document, and his eyes, when they found her, were wide with something that might have been hope. Sarah held up the herbal medicine book. Your mother wrote notes in the margins about a preparation for accelerating wound healing. Calendula and comfrey root in a specific ratio. I want to try making it. Where is your still room? He looked at her for 3 full seconds without speaking. Then he walked around the desk past her and opened the study door. I will show you, he said. The still room was in the basement of the east wing, a stone-walled room with shelves lined with glass jars and dried herbs hanging from the ceiling in bundles that filled the space with a fragrance so dense and green it was like walking into a living forest. It had not been used in years. Dust covered every surface. But the herbs were still viable, the equipment still functional, and the recipe book his mother had left on the work table was still open to the last page she had been working on. Sarah touched the page gently. The handwriting was small and precise, the kind of writing produced by someone who valued accuracy. She died when you were young, Sarah said. Not a question. Kyle stood in the doorway, too large for the room, watching her with an expression she could not read. I was 11, he said. I did not come down here after. Sarah looked at the dusty jars, the abandoned tools, the book left open, as if its reader had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. Would you mind if I used it? She asked. His hands at his sides clenched and unclenched. It was the only outward sign of whatever was happening inside him. She would have wanted someone too, he said. Sarah spent the next 2 weeks in the still room. She cleaned it. She organized the herbs, discarding what had spoiled, salvaging what had not. She followed the late Queen's recipes, adapting them with techniques she had learned from old Marin at Silver Ridge. She made the wound-healing salve and tested it on her own collarbone, and it worked beautifully, reducing the inflammation while preserving the clarity of the scars. She made other things too. A tea for joint pain that she left outside Astrid's office. A balm for cracked hands that she gave to the kitchen staff who had been the first members of Blackmore Pack to speak to her normally. An infusion for colic that one of the young mothers in the pack needed for her newborn. Word spread. The still room became a place where wolves stopped by to ask for remedies, and then to ask advice, and then simply to talk. Sarah discovered that she was good at listening, and that people told her things they would not tell others, because she was quiet, and because she had the kind of face that suggested she understood pain. She was also discovering something about her wolf. It was growing stronger every day, not just present, but powerful, pressing against her skin with an insistence that made her palms itch and her vision sharpen and the colors of the world intensify until the green of the pine trees hurt to look at. She could smell things she had never smelled before. The emotional states of the wolves around her arrived as scent profiles. Anxiety smelled of copper, happiness of warm bread, grief of wet stone. She could hear conversations from 3 rooms away. This was not normal Omega behavior. She knew this. She had spent enough time assisting the healer at Silver Ridge to understand the typical sensory range of each rank, and what she was experiencing exceeded the parameters of any rank she had studied. She did not tell Kyle. She did not tell anyone, because she had spent 7 years being punished for being weak, and she was not ready to find out what would happen when people discovered she might be something else, entirely. But she could not hide it forever, because on the morning of her 3rd week at Blackmore, a rogue wolf crossed the border. Sarah was in the herb garden when she smelled it. The garden was behind the east wing, a terraced hillside, planted with medicinal herbs that had gone half wild in the years since the Queen's death, and Sarah had been spending her mornings pruning and replanting her hands in the dirt, her wolf calm and content, in a way it had never been. The smell came from the northeast. Sick wolf. Blood. Infection. And underneath the acrid chemical tang of wolfsbane, the poison that was used to weaken wolves before killing them. Sarah stood up. Her hands were covered in soil. The wind shifted, and she caught the rest of it, the trail of scent leading from the forest to the border ward, and then through it. The rogue was already inside Blackmore territory. It was moving fast, driven by fear or rage or both, and it was heading directly for the pack house. She should have gone inside. She should have found a guard. She should have done anything other than what she actually did, which was to walk to the edge of the garden place, her hands on the stone wall, and look out into the tree line where the rogue would emerge. It came out of the pines like a nightmare. A wolf, massive and dark grey, with foam at its mouth and eyes that were glazed with wolfsbane madness. It was running blind, crashing through undergrowth, and when it saw the pack house, it lunged toward it with the single-minded desperation of a creature that has nothing left to lose. The border guards were 100 yards behind it, shouting, weapons drawn. They would not reach it in time. The wolf was going to hit the garden wall where Sarah was standing, and then it was going to hit the pack house, and then people were going to die. Sarah's wolf did not ask permission. It simply rose. The shift was agonizing. 7 years of dormancy meant 7 years of muscle and bone that had never been asked to rearrange themselves, and the pain was a white, hot nova that blanked out her vision and filled her mouth with the taste of iron. She fell to her knees on the garden wall, and her body began to change. But it didn't change into an omega wolf. Omega wolves were small, compact, built for submission and nurturing, not combat. What emerged from Sarah's breaking bones and tearing skin was something else entirely. She was white. Pure white, like fresh snow, like bleached bone. And she was not small. She was nearly the size of the rogue wolf that was charging toward her, and her eyes, when they opened, were not the soft brown of an omega or the amber of an alpha. They were silver, bright, luminous silver, like moonlight made solid. The rogue wolf saw her and skidded to a stop. The wolfsbane madness was still in its eyes, but something cut through it, some ancient recognition that predated pack politics and rank systems and everything the modern wolf world had built to sort its members into categories. The rogue's legs buckled. It dropped to its belly on the frozen ground and whined a high, thin sound of submission that no alpha or omega or beta could have compelled. Because Sarah was none of those things. She was a lunar wolf, the last lunar wolf born in 4 generations, a rank so rare that most packs had removed it from their classification systems altogether. Lunar wolves were not defined by dominance or submission. They were defined by influence. They could calm madness. They could heal with their presence. They could command loyalty not through force, but through a biological imperative that was older than language. The rogue wolf lay at her feet, trembling, the wolfsbane still burning through its veins, and Sarah lowered her white muzzle and pressed her nose against its forehead and breathed. The effect was visible. The foam at the rogue's mouth dissolved. The glazed eyes cleared. The trembling slowed, and then stopped, replaced by a deep, shuddering exhale as the madness released its grip. The wolf blinked, confused, lucid, in pain, but sane. The border guards arrived. They stared at the white wolf, standing on the garden wall, over a pacified rogue, and they stared at the silver eyes, and they said nothing, because there was nothing in their training that covered this. Sarah shifted back. The pain was less this time. She knelt on the wall in her torn clothing, her hands shaking her collarbone scar vivid against her pale skin, and she looked up to find Kell standing at the east wing entrance. He had watched the entire thing. She expected many things from his expression. Shock, confusion, the calculating look of a king who has just discovered a weapon in his territory. Instead, his face showed something that took her a moment to identify, because she had seen it so rarely in her life. Understanding. He walked to her. He stopped at the base of the garden wall. He looked up at her, and his wolf pressed against the air between them, so hard she could feel its fur on her skin. "Luna Wolf," he said. "Yes," Sarah said. "I did not know. I did not know until your growl in the Silver Ridge yard. I thought my wolf was dead." "Your wolf was sleeping," he said. "Waiting." For what? He held out his hand to help her down from the wall, and his eyes in the morning light were the color of raw honey, and his scarred fingers were warm and steady. "For a safe place to wake up," he said. News of the Luna Wolf spread through Blackmoor like fire. Within hours, Sarah could feel the change in every interaction. Wolves who had been cautiously friendly became openly reverent. Wolves who had been indifferent became attentive. Astrid ran tests that confirmed what the old texts described: elevated calming pheromones, an immune response that could neutralize toxins through physical contact, a sensory range that exceeded any recorded rank. The council demanded a formal audience. Sarah stood in the great hall of Blackmoor Packhouse, wearing clothes that fit her now, boots on her feet, her collarbone scar visible above the neckline of her shirt, because she refused to cover it, and she faced a room full of the most powerful wolves in the territory. Kyle sat in the throne at the head of the hall. It was carved from a single piece of dark wood, and it was enormous, and he filled it the way a flame fills a lamp completely and without apology. His eyes never left her. The council elder, a white-haired wolf named Brennan, who spoke in the careful cadences of someone who had been navigating pack politics for 50 years, asked the question that everyone was thinking. A Luna Wolf has not been born in 4 generations. The last one was Queen Elara of the Silverblood line. The Silverblood line was believed to have been destroyed in the purges. If this woman is truly a Luna Wolf, then she carries Silverblood lineage, and the political implications are— "Enough," Kyle said. The word was quiet, and it silenced the hall instantly. "She is my mate. She is a Luna Wolf. These are facts. The political implications can wait until she has been a member of this pack for more than 3 weeks." Sarah looked at him and felt the mate bond pulse between them like a living wire, and for the first time since she had arrived at Blackmoor, she did not try to dampen it. But the political implications didn't wait. They arrived 3 days later in the form of a delegation from Silver Ridge. Hendricks did not come himself. He sent his beta prime, the one who had held Sarah down during the branding. His name was Garrick, and he arrived at the gates of Blackmoor with 4 Silver Ridge wolves and a diplomatic immunity seal and a demand for Sarah's return. "She is pack property," Garrick stated, standing in the entrance hall with a posture that suggested he knew he was in danger and had chosen bravado as his armor. "She was born in Silver Ridge. She was registered in Silver Ridge. Regardless of her mate bond or her supposed abilities, she belongs to us." Kyle was not in the room. He had been informed of the delegation's arrival and had chosen to let Thorne handle the initial reception, a strategic decision that Sarah recognized as a test. He wanted to see what she would do. Sarah stepped forward. The The Silver Ridge wolves flinched, all 4 of them. Garrick did not flinch, but his scent shifted from bravado to something sour and sharp, the smell of a wolf recognizing a predator. "I am not pack property," Sarah said. "I was stripped of my rank. You declared me unranked, invisible. The moment you burned that brand off my shoulder, you severed my legal tie to Silver Ridge. I owe you nothing. You have no claim." Garrick's jaw tightened. She could see the muscles working the calculation behind his eyes. He had expected the cowering Omega. He remembered the girl who said nothing while they held her down. He had not expected this. "The Council will dispute that interpretation," he said. "Then the Council can take it up with the Alpha King of Blackmoor," Sarah said. "I believe his position on the matter has already been communicated." Garrick looked at her, and for one brief moment something crossed his face that was not anger or political calculation or the cruelty she remembered from the branding table. It was something smaller and stranger. It was embarrassment. The particular kind of embarrassment that comes from being confronted by someone you have wronged and realizing in their presence exactly how small you became when you were hurting them. He did not apologize. He would never apologize, but his eyes dropped for half a second, and his scent shifted again to something that smelled almost like wet stone, and Sarah recognized it from her expanded senses. Grief. A flash of it there, and gone like a fish surfacing in dark water. She filed it away. She did not forgive him, but she noticed it, because she was learning that the world was more complicated than the categories she had been sorted into, and the people who hurt you were sometimes also people who were hurt. And both things could be true without either one cancelling the other. Garrick left. The delegation returned to Silver Ridge empty-handed. That night, Sarah went to Kyle's study. He was at his desk reading reports by lamplight. The fire was low. The room smelled of coffee and pine and the old leather scent of him. He looked up when she entered, and his expression was careful, neutral, the face of a man who had been waiting for something and was afraid to want it too much. "You could have handled Garrick yourself," she said. "Why did you let me do it? Because it was yours to handle," he said. "Your pack, your history, your voice. I am your mate, not your proxy." She crossed the room. She stopped in front of his desk. The lamplight caught the scar on her collarbone and threw the letters into sharp relief. "I want to show you something," she said. She unbuttoned the top 2 buttons of her shirt and pulled the fabric aside, exposing the full carving. "Omega!" The letters were healed now, clean white scars against her skin, the calendula salve having done its work. They were not pretty. They were not meant to be. Kyle stood. He came around the desk. He stopped in front of her close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off his body, and he looked down at the letters, and his breath caught in a way that was audible in the quiet room. "May I?" he said, and waited. She nodded. He bent his head. His lips touched the O at the far left of her collarbone, and the contact sent a current through her body that made her fingers grip the edge of his desk for balance. His mouth was warm. His breath was warm. He moved to the M, and his lips parted slightly, and she felt the edge of his teeth trace the scar tissue with a precision that matched the deliberateness with which she had carved the letters in the first place. He traced each letter. O, M, E, G, A, his teeth following the lines she had cut into her own skin as if he were reading her body's declaration, with his mouth acknowledging it, honoring it. When he reached the final A, he pressed his lips there and stayed. "You carved your rank back," he murmured against her skin. "Let me learn it." His voice vibrated against her collarbone and traveled down through her sternum into the space where her wolf lived, and her wolf pressed up against the sensation and held. "This is not a rank I am proud of," she said. Her voice was not entirely steady. He lifted his head. His amber eyes were very close. She could see every gold fleck, every line, the scar on his temple, the way his pupils had expanded until the gold was just a ring. "It is the rank you claimed for yourself," he said. "That makes it the highest rank in any room you stand in." She kissed him, not because the mate bond demanded it, though it was screaming in her blood, not because he was a king, though he was, because he had given her space for 3 weeks, and boots and a still room, and the right to handle her own enemies, and he had traced the ugliest thing on her body, with his mouth as if it were sacred text. The kiss was not gentle. Neither of them was gentle. They were 2 people who had survived things that should have broken them, and the place where they met was not soft. It was the place where broken edges fit together, jagged and precise. When they pulled apart, his forehead rested against hers, and his breathing was uneven, and his hands were on her waist, holding her as if she were something he had found after a long search and was terrified of losing. "I am afraid," she said. "I have been nothing for so long. I do not know how to be something without waiting for it to be taken away." "Then we will practice," he said. The crisis came on a Tuesday. Sarah was in the still room grinding dried yarrow root into a fine powder for a clotting salve when she heard the first explosion. It was distant, a dull thud that vibrated through the stone walls and rattled the glass jars on their shelves. She put down the mortar and pestle and listened. Silence. Then a second explosion closer, and the sound of wolves howling, not the casual howl of territory marking, but the urgent, keening howl of a pack under attack. She ran. The great hall was chaos, wolves in mid-shift, others strapping on tactical gear, Thorn barking orders into a radio with the efficiency of a commander who had done this before. The smell was overwhelming. Fear, adrenaline, blood already, though the fighting had barely begun. "What is happening?" Sarah demanded. "Rogue Army," Thorn said without looking at her. 300 wolves. Coordinated attack on the eastern border. Someone armed them with wolfsbane weapons. She felt the blood drain from her face. Wolfsbane weapons. The poison that had driven the rogue wolf mad in the garden. Weaponized and distributed to 300 wolves. "Where is Cale?" she asked. Thorn's silence was its own answer. "He went to the front line," Sarah said. "He is the Alpha King," Thorn said. "It is what he does." She was moving before she finished processing the thought. Thorn called after her, but she was already through the hall, through the entrance into the cold morning air, and her wolf was rising in her chest like a tide. The eastern border was 2 miles from the pack house. Sarah ran it in under 10 minutes, which should have been impossible for a wolf of any rank, but her body was doing things that the textbooks had no category for, and she had stopped trying to make sense of it. She heard the fighting before she saw it, the clash of shifted wolves, the crack of wolfsbane weapons discharging the screams that came from wolves poisoned in mid-combat, their shifts destabilizing their bodies, caught between forms. The smell was a wall of copper and chemical bitterness and animal terror. She crested the ridge and saw the battlefield below. It was worse than she had imagined. Kyle's wolves were outnumbered, and the wolfsbane was devastating. Wolves hit by the weapons convulsed their bodies, contorting foam at their mouths, eyes rolling to white. The rogue army moved in organized formations, nothing like the lone, maddened wolf in the garden. Someone had trained them. Someone had planned this. Kyle was in the center of the line. She could not miss him. Even in wolf form he was enormous, a black wolf the size of a horse, his eyes burning amber, his jaws red with blood. He was holding the center through sheer will and violence, but she could see the wolfsbane burns on his flank, where a weapon had caught him, and he was favoring his left side, and his wolves were being driven back. Sarah shifted. The pain was a distant thing now, her body learning the change, accommodating it. The white wolf emerged on the ridgeline, and the battlefield paused. 300 rogues looked up. The Blackmoor wolves looked up. Kyle looked up. Sarah opened her mouth and howled. The sound was not something that could be adequately described in human language. It was a frequency that traveled through the ground and through the air simultaneously, that bypassed ears and entered bodies directly, that spoke to the oldest and deepest part of every wolf on that field. It was the howl of a lunar wolf, and it carried a command that predated the concept of command. Stop. The rogue wolves stopped. Not all at once. Not cleanly. Some of them fought it, thrashing against the compulsion, their wolfsbane-addled minds struggling to override the biological imperative. But one by one, in a ripple that spread from the ridge outward, they stopped fighting. Their bodies dropped, their heads lowered. The ones who had been poisoned worst, the ones whose minds were broken by the chemical, they whined and crawled toward her, seeking the healing presence they could feel radiating from the white wolf on the hill. The Blackmoor wolves didn't stop, but they pulled back from their opponents and formed defensive lines, and in the sudden silence of the battlefield, the only sound was the wind in the pines and the whimpering of 300 rogues submitting to a rank they didn't understand, but couldn't resist. Sarah descended the ridge. She walked through the battlefield, stepping over fallen wolves, her white paws staining red with blood that was not hers, and she found the most badly poisoned rogues, and she pressed her nose against them one by one, and one by one the madness left their eyes, and they went limp with relief, crying in the way wolves cry with their whole bodies. She reached Kyle. He had shifted back to human form, and was on one knee, his left hand pressed against the wolfsbane burn on his ribs. The skin was blistered and weeping. His face was pale under the blood and dirt. His eyes, when they met hers, were full of something that was too big for the word she was thinking, but she was thinking it anyway. She shifted back. She was naked on a battlefield, covered in other people's blood, and she didn't care. She put her hands on his ribs where the wolfsbane was burning, and she felt her wolf reach through her palms and into his body and pull the poison out. It hurt. The toxin passed through her hands like liquid fire, and she screamed a sound that was more wolf than human. And then it was over, and the burn on his ribs was fading, and her palms were blistered, but his skin was whole. He caught her before she fell. His arms around her were shaking. His face was pressed against her hair, and he was breathing her in, and his wolf was pressing against every inch of her through the mate bond, searching for damage, cataloguing, protecting. "You came to the front line," he said. His voice was wrecked. "It is what lunar wolves do," she said. Or so the old texts suggest. I have not actually read most of them yet. He made a sound that might have been a laugh in a less desperate moment. The aftermath revealed the conspiracy. The rogue army had been funded and armed by 3 packs in the Southern Territories, packs that had been trying to destabilize Blackmoor's northern dominance for years. The wolfsbane weapons had been manufactured at a facility that was traced through careful investigation over the following week to a shell company owned by the Silver Ridge Pack. Hendricks, the man who had burned her brand, the man who cried over his dead daughter's photograph, the man who had sent rogues armed with poison to destroy the pack that had taken in the Omega he had discarded. Sarah sat in the council hall while this information was presented, and she watched Kyle's face go through several stages of controlled fury, and she thought about the complicated mathematics of people. Hendrix had loved his daughter. Hendrix had funded a wolfsbane army. Both things were true. "What would you have me do?" Kyle asked her in front of the full council. It was the first time he had asked her a question in a public forum, and the council noticed. The weight of it settled on the room like snowfall. Sarah thought for a long time. "Arrest him," she said. "Put him on trial before the Interpack Tribunal. Let the evidence speak. Let his pack see what he has done. Do not destroy Silver Ridge. There are children there. There are wolves who had no part in this. There is a half-blind healer named Maran who lives in a stone cottage by the herb garden, and who once gave me calendula paste when no one else would look at me. Punish the man. Spare the pack." Kyle looked at her, and the council looked at her. And Thorn, standing against the wall, made a small sound that might have been approval. "Done," Kyle said. Hendrix was arrested the following day. He did not resist. When they brought him out of the Silver Ridge pack house in restraints, Sarah was told he was carrying the photograph of his daughter, and he did not look at anyone. The trial would take months. The evidence was overwhelming. She did not need to watch. What she needed, she realized, was to stop waiting for the next catastrophe and start building something. The marking ceremony took place on a full moon night, 6 weeks after Sarah had arrived at Blackmoor, covered in frost and blood, and wearing a shift she had been given the previous winter. The great hall was lit with beeswax candles. The smell was honey and pine resin, and the particular clean scent of wolves in their best clothes. The pack filled the hall, standing along the walls, crowding the doorways. Sarah could feel every one of them through her Luna, sense a web of emotional presences, each distinct, each real. The young mother whose baby's colic she had treated, the kitchen staff whose cracked hands she had healed, Astrid standing near the front with her arms crossed and her steel-grey hair gleaming in the candlelight, watching with the satisfied expression of a healer who had done her job well. Sarah wore a dress that Astrid had helped her choose, deep green, simple cut to leave her collarbone bare. The scars were visible. Omega, carved in her own hand, healed into white lines against her skin. She had considered covering them. She had decided against it. They were her first act of self-determination. They stayed. Kyle stood at the front of the hall in black because he was Kyle, and the concept of him wearing any other color was frankly absurd. The scar on his temple caught the candlelight. His hands were at his sides, and they were not shaking, though the mate bond told her his heartbeat was running at roughly twice its normal rate. She walked to him. The hall was silent. Her boots, the ones he had left outside her door on her first morning at Blackmoor, made soft sounds on the stone floor. She stopped in front of him and looked up. His amber eyes were very bright. "I was nothing when I came here," she said, and her voice carried in the silent hall without effort. "You did not make me something. You gave me room to remember that I already was." His jaw worked. She saw the effort it cost him to keep his composure, the king's mask holding steady against the man's emotion. He bent his head. His mouth found the curve of her neck where it met her shoulder, the traditional marking point, and his teeth pressed against her skin with a controlled pressure that was both claim and question. She felt the mate bond surge between them, a circuit completing a lock, turning a sound that only they could hear, reaching its final note. She tilted her head and gave him access, and he bit down. The marking was pain, and it was heat, and it was the sensation of belonging somewhere for the first time in her life, not as property, but as partner, not as something owned, but as something chosen. and her wolf rose inside her, and met his wolf, and the hall filled with a resonance that made every candle flame flicker, and every wolf present bow their heads involuntarily. When he lifted his mouth from her neck, there was blood on his lips, and his eyes were wet, and he said in a voice that was hoarse and raw and carried to every corner of the hall, "My mate, my Luna, my equal." The pack howled, not out of obligation, not out of ceremony. They howled because the sound wanted out of them, because the Luna wolf's presence pulled it from their chests the way a full moon pulls the tide, and the sound shook the candles in their holders and rang off the stone walls and travelled out through the open windows into the night, where it rolled down the mountainside and into the forest. Sarah stood in the centre of it. Her neck, bleeding her collarbone, scarred her wolf, finally fully awake. She looked out at the hall full of wolves who had become her pack in 6 weeks, and she did not smile, because smiling was too small for what she felt. She reached up and touched the mark on her neck. Then she touched the scars on her collarbone. 2 marks, one given, one taken. Both hers. Kyle's hand found the small of her back. His palm was warm and broad and steady, and he did not pull her closer. He simply rested his hand there, a point of contact, a declaration that had nothing to do with possession and everything to do with presence. The candles burned, the wolves quieted. Outside, the full moon hung above the pines like a white eye, watching the stone and timber fortress, where a healer had once built a medical wing, and a girl had once rebuilt a still room, and a king had once left boots outside a door without a note. Sarah leaned back just slightly into the warmth of his hand. The great hall smelled of beeswax and pine, and the green, sharp scent of yarrow that still clung to her fingers from that morning's work in the still room. She breathed in. She breathed out. She stayed.